couple of songs we're going to play. So basically, they realised that's the single, that should be the single, and it comes out, and it just takes off immediately. It just strikes a chord with the British, gets on TV. Rough Trade basically have their first hit single as an indie label, happening very, very quick. So, as it says here, within 3 weeks of release, Rough Trade had finally scored its first ever top 30 single, which in turn generated an equally major milestone. The Smiths became the label's first act invited to appear on Top of the Pops. And Top of the Pops, for those who may not know, just pausing there, I assume people probably know, it was the chart show in Britain. It was watched by a significant percentage of the country, like 25% of the country, and probably about 80% or of 90% of the record-buying youth. But it was really crass at the same time. So, even those who despise Top of the Pops for its inane DJs, its lip-sync performances, its unstated but clearly noted musical prejudices, and its incessant celebration of pop music as nothing but a happy-go-lucky form of mindless entertainment, couldn't help but tune in for the Thursday evening ritual anyway. Couldn't help hoping that the occasional act of note would sell enough records to justify an appearance, or that a genuinely exciting new act might somehow slip into a slot typically reserved for those who played safe. For that particular audience, the appearance of the Smiths on Thursday, 24th of November 1983 proved nothing short of a revelation. In fact, it has frequently been cited as one of Britain's most influential moments of music television. It is one that has to be reviewed in context. The Smiths were introduced by the blandest of daytime radio DJs on a week when the top 3 chart positions were held by Billy Joel, Paul McCartney with Michael Jackson, and Shakin' Stevens. They were sandwiched in between Marilyn, a Boy George clone making the most of his brief patronage by the Culture Club star, and the Thompson twins, who represented everything that the post-punk independent scene had ever sold out. And they performed on a stage lit in multiple hues from underneath and strewn on top with the show's endless barrage of balloons that reduced pop performance to the level of a child's birthday party with a disco ball rotating above them. Yet the Smiths were somehow able to transcend this environment and present themselves as precisely what they were: a young 4-piece guitar band steeped in musical tradition, Mars' rhythmic swaying to his Red Rickenbacker, recording any number of 1960s acts on the same show, hip to their own sense of fashion, unadored of pretension, and yet with a frontman who instantly stood at odds to everyone else on Top of the Pops that night, or that month, or indeed that year. Morrissey's outfit, his movements, his flowers, all were essentially the same as on the other TV shows they just appeared on, The Tube and Riverside, as was his unwillingness to stand before a microphone and pretend that this was anything but a lip-sync performance. But now it was all being viewed, quite literally, under the searing heat of the national spotlight. The Smiths appeared entirely comfortable, as if that stage had always been destined for them. By one of those coincidences that helped create a rock band's legend, the Smiths had a show booked for the same night as their appearance on Top of the Pops, at the Hacienda in their home city of Manchester, no less. The Smiths had not performed live in Manchester since July. They played London 11 times in between, and so much had happened to them in the interim that they could have expected to pack the venue even without the TV exposure. But the excitement for Manchester music fans of having a hometown band in the top 30 and appearing on Top of the Pops just a couple of hours before playing a local gig turned what was already a triumphant homecoming into an event. Thousands showed up. For the Smiths, excitement about performing that night was compounded by nervousness as to whether they would actually get there. They were still at the BBC studios well into the afternoon. Rough Trade, in an act of largesse, was quite out of character with the company's pre-hit history, booked a helicopter to ferry them to 200 miles north, but no one had bothered to check whether the band would actually approve. Morrissey, whose abject fear of flying had not stopped him from visiting America so many times already, refused the transportation. The Smiths took a train to Manchester instead, arriving at the venue hours late, trusting that their crew, such as it was, would have everything set up for them and ready to go. The group James, who despite their head start on the Smiths had only just released their first single on Factory and were now playing the role of support act, had finished their set a long time ago. We had to be carried through the streets, recalled Johnny Marr, and there were people trying to touch you, and a couple of them are guys you went to school with, and suddenly they're your fans. That was surreal, really surreal. Adding to the madness, the Hacienda had a live camera feed showing the group's eventual arrival in the dressing room as assurance to those on the inside that the band had made it north in time. For that night, it was like the mid-60s, when Manchester had hosted Top of the Pops and put its bands on top of the American charts 3 times in a row, all over again. Inside, the Smiths were duly treated as the all-conquering heroes, enduring a series of stage invasions that trampled underfoot the flowers they had strewn across the place, like those in Oscar Wilde's The Nightingale on the Rose. Returning for several encores to play their 2 singles a second time each, stretching the concert well past the British public's officially sanctioned bedtimes. Smith's manager, Joe Moss, was paid out on 2,400 people. The official capacity was 1,650. It was the biggest night in the 18-month-old club's history. And with that, we're going to jump to the next song. Did you need to ask me something, Noel?
Can I take a break filming?
Yes, you can. Absolutely.